On Friday, we were relaxing at the local dive after a long day of work. We contacted the bar. The four of us were listening to Bill Chapman tell again how he had recently found that his wife of 25 years had an affair. The other three had promised him their support and frequently mentioned the cost of divorce if he chose to pursue it. The four of them were lifetime friends, and I was invited to join their group shortly after arriving in their small town. All five of us had been in the Marines. Over 10 years ago, I had thrown a dart at a map on the wall and ended up at the coastal town of Spam. Upon my arrival, I purchased and expanded the lone grocery store for miles, using a freshly constituted offshore LLC. Back then, Spam was a logging town with a population of roughly 1,000. The nearest town was over a half-hour distant. Within a year, I had expanded the business, obtained a liquor license, and increased its size. The gas bar arrived later. The store carried all of the necessities. I now had 8 full-time employees and 6 part-time. It took me a year to start building a log home on land I purchased at a tax sale on the outskirts of town. My 4 pals had spent hours assisting me in designing it because they all worked at the mill. I was able to buy raw logs to bark directly at wholesale costs, saving me a lot of money. As a result, I now owned a 3-bedroom, 3,800-square-foot log home with 2 levels that overlooked the village and the coast. They just had one issue with me. As far as they knew, I had never married. I hadn't dated since my arrival. The rumor mill described me as a clothing closet men's man. Although no one had ever seen me make a pass at anyone, the women respected me, but soon realized I was a bachelor and would remain such. I was someone everyone could trust, and they did. Everyone had a lot of questions about me, but they quickly discovered that I was a very secretive man who wouldn't reveal much about my background. I set up the LLC such that the corporation would pay all taxes. Anything I took out for personal purposes came from the retained equity. So when I filed my personal taxes, it stated that I had no income. I paid for everything in cash or using a debit card. I did not even have a personal credit card. The only difference was that I started using my second name instead of my first. The sign at the entrance to our village read, "Next Stop, Japan." Because of what had transpired in my past, no one knew I had arrived from New York, 2 states away from the coast of Washington. I've often wondered what type of moron would name a place bosom. After the second beer, we broke up since Bill's eldest son was returning home from university that night, accompanied by his fiancée, Bill's wife, who had traveled to Seattle to pick them up. We were all invited to a cookout on Saturday to celebrate his graduation and engagement. Bill wanted to be sober and waiting when they arrived. After all, he didn't want his prospective daughter-in-law to think he was nothing more than the village drinker. Stephen had been hired by one of New York's largest investment firms, and we all knew how proud Bill was. As usual, I was the last to arrive, fearing that one of my friends' wives might have brought someone along to set me up. They treated it like a game because they wanted to know if I was straight or not. Their lack of knowledge simply fueled their interest, so I was usually the last to arrive and the first to depart. Bill's wife, Connie, noticed me driving up in my old 1940 repaired Ford truck. It made me happy and proud. "You got to meet Stephen's girlfriend, a redhead," she said. "Jennifer is 22 years old with 2 sisters and 3 brothers. I fell in love with her as soon as I met her. One look at her confirms she is someone you want to know. I've already discovered that she has a heart of gold. I wanted to warn you since we both know that seeing a redhead makes you silent, distant, and unhappy. I've often wondered if a redhead terrified you in the past. I do not know, because you refuse to open up about anything. Grab a nice beer and join us in the backyard afterward." But when I went out to their backyard, I discovered that the entire team was present, including all of their children and a few extras. Stephen noticed me and went up to give me a big embrace. After thanking me for the umpteenth time for supporting the cost of his studies, he led me into the crowd to introduce me to his girlfriend when he called her. Jennifer turned towards me. My face turned completely white. I grew rigid and strained. I looked like I was seeing ghosts. My first instinct was to walk the path of life. Something forced upon me was about to be revealed. I wasn't sure I could stay and face it. Jennifer was always like a miniature version of her mother. Jennifer was one of a group of identical triplets. They last saw her in the morning. I had caught her mother and brother making love in our master bed like 2 dogs in heat. I was so nervous that I couldn't speak. She, like her mother, was a natural redhead whose figure exuded sexiness. At 5'6", she was smoking hot with curves in all the right places. Like her mother, the curve of her buttocks and hips was her most valuable asset. When she saw me standing there, a man would walk around with a permanent hard-on. Her baby blue eyes glowed as if they were heated. Her tears immediately began to flow, but it was the largest smile on her face that told me. They were quite happy. I was on the edge of losing it because seeing her as a gorgeous adult confronted me with anguish, grief, and loss. That warm smile reminded me of how much time I had missed with my children. My God, I do not believe it. Jennifer screamed through her cries, expressing her pleasure as she ran towards me. You are alive. I knew it. My heart would never let me think you were dead. We were all informed by your relatives that you had died, and no matter how hard they tried, I refused to believe it. The silence was so loud that we could hear the breeze. Everyone had a shocked expression on their faces. Nobody had a clue what to say. They must have been wondering what this was about. Everyone was taken aback as Jennifer rushed into my arms. Stephen, breaking it, stated, You know, Charlie, how Charles's full name is Jonathan Charles Barnes III. Jennifer spoke between sobs. I know. Since he's my father, I'd recognize his face anywhere. The family has always stated that he committed self-destruction due to financial issues. When we inquired about him, however, I had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Uncle James, my stepfather, was always extremely quiet. He only did this when he had something to conceal. As we grew up, we realized that was his way of avoiding admitting or confronting the truth. I placed my arms around her, gripping her tightly as she buried her face into my neck. We both cried. It had been 15 years since I had hugged one of my daughters like this. At the moment, she was 7 years old. At that point, the love I had kept hidden for so long exploded in our hearts. Let go. Everyone heard our sobs, knowing that everyone expected an explanation. I carefully considered my comments as I tried to calm us both down. I have to admit that it took us both a while. My family expelled me so they could keep their lies and secrets concealed from them. At the time, it was critical to preserve the family name, its public political image, and an honor above reproach. I was compelled, against my will, to sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. This occurred after I stepped into my home and discovered my older brother making love to my wife, Jennifer's mother. I had just returned unexpectedly from dropping the girls off at school because I had forgotten my briefcase, which contained the paperwork I required. Before I departed, I witnessed him possess and claim control of my wife. I explained that my brother and wife had no idea I was there until they finished making out. Before confronting them, I recorded a video of their loving making using my cell phone. They laughed about me, catching them as if it was nothing but tears. I walked out. They exhibited no guilt or regret, but after showing the judge my video of them, my grandfather, her family, and I agreed we needed to clean up the situation so that they could all safeguard their crucial political careers. It was also done to allow my brother, the chosen one, to marry my wife. I spoke through tears. Marrying a widow with 3 daughters would be advantageous for him in his political campaign. Time has demonstrated that it was for more than 15 years. To those who know the family truth, especially her mother, I've been the walking dead. Now I'm just Charlie Barnes. Nothing more, nothing less. If fate had not intervened, no one would have known the truth, I stated forcefully. In my wildest thoughts, I never imagined the truth coming out. Everyone was stunned. A couple people appeared to be about to puke up. I observed Connie was gazing down at the ground, attempting to conceal her own humiliation. I could see her struggling to hide her tears. She was beginning to understand for the first time the effects of her own actions through the eyes of others. She had no idea that once the genie was let out of its bottle, everything would change. No one, unless they had experienced the struggle and isolation. Would someone recognize the underlying pain? Holding my kid in my arms for the first time in years helped me realize the unintended effects of a family's concealed facts. At that point, I felt humiliated. My tears began to pour again for myself and my kid. Our mutual healing had started. There were only 2 things that mattered in life. My granddad said it was about money and power. The rest of it was pure BS. He had both. My first mistake was approaching him after catching my wife and brother when I was very disturbed. At that period, the judge was being considered for the Supreme Court, and a scandal would have wrecked his chances. By the time I finished telling him what I had learned, he had already begun plotting with his legal mind to handle the situation such that the events would never be revealed. He viewed the video, and I've never heard him curse more in his life. His first call was to my wife's father, Senator Jones of Maine. He told Raymond Thompson what I had caught and filmed. I texted him the video file. Jones's father's outrage made it apparent that he was not impressed. He stated he'd take a private jet out. They both agreed that no action would be taken until the three of us had discussed everything before making the following call. He put on a program that would record the discussion he was about to have with a cold, harsh expression. He called my wife and listened to one side of a conversation in which the moniker Jerk 304 and other derogatory names would have appeared hilarious if I hadn't used them myself. He slammed down on her like a ton of bricks, making it apparent that she and my foolish brother had been acting like immature teens. If this comes out, your father's and my careers are over. None of this would be occurring, Joan, if you had learned how to cross your legs. It wouldn't have been an issue. But James's family and the media will chew it up. My grandfather stated the reporters would be claiming incest on the front page, and he put his finger over his mouth to urge me to stay silent. He put the phone on speaker and asked Joan if her 3 girls were indeed mine. She said yes. My grandfather asked, "Well, how do you know for sure?" "Perhaps because you've proven yourself to be nothing more than another man's 304. We should do blood tests to make sure." Joan became enraged. She stated that the affair with James began 3 years ago and that there had been no others. The judge asked, "Why should anyone believe what you say?" She explained that she was on the pill since she didn't want any more children. So as far as we can tell, James was not your only lover. My grandfather then said, "Do you love John?" She replied, "Yes, I have always loved him, but that has changed. I used to love him in the same way that a woman would love her husband, but now it's more like a sister loves her brother." Those words tore my heart out. The judge could see my anguish. It was as though she had stabbed me in the heart. Joan explained that the judge, who was now enraged, had observed my sorrow and tears. I guess James and I are to blame for it. If I had worked as hard on the marriage as John did, this would never have happened. James noticed my sexual attraction to him before John and I married, and he pursued me after he moved in. Joan went on to say that they had let their physical desire to one other guide them. It boiled over, and I eventually gave in to his continuous attention. With Jim residing with us as he began his civilian life and John on his numerous business trips, our ambitions drove us to where now. Initially, it was primarily physical. We hadn't realized we'd fallen in love until it was too late. By then, we didn't want it to end. We were satisfied and kept it hidden from his brother. We didn't think it through. I don't believe we intended to hurt John. We didn't know what we were going to do until John caught us. Sadly, I could tell by the sound of her voice that she felt neither sorrow or remorse. There was nothing. I have no regrets. She wasn't even embarrassed that they'd been caught. My grandfather noticed the tears pouring down my cheeks. Their destruction of my world was now complete. My grandfather then inquired, "Do you love James again?" To confirm, John said yes. After catching us, John went away. James asked me to be his wife, and I consented. My grandfather responded. So James has taken away his younger brother, his wife, his children, and his life. What type of man would do that to his younger brother? What type of woman would let that happen? How could either of you do that to another person? Do you believe John deserved this jerk? Joan stated, "We will not deny John his right to see the children when our schedule permits, because James intends to run for political office. So whatever we decide to do, it must be done softly and sensitively in public. James will have to be their new father. John will be the distant uncle. As you are well aware, the courts are still hesitant to award sole custody to the father." My grandfather then stated, "I suppose the only thing I have left to say to James or you is that after we have resolved this matter, I never want to hear from either of you again. In my opinion, both James and you were dead." He then slammed the phone down in fury. I had never seen him look so angry at me. After a few moments of silence, my grandfather remarked, "Remember the hurt, the pain, and your loss they have for all intention. You have made it quite plain that you have been written out of their and your own children's life. It would be better for everyone right now if you died, because that is how people perceive you. They care more about what they flush down the toilet than you do. Do you think they purposely set themselves up to get caught? Through my eyes? It looks like they did. If it is true, it is freezing. The day will come when you will have the opportunity to exact revenge. When it does, show no mercy. Take no prisoners, but leave them devastated and alive. Remember that dogs always return to their vomit. Darn it, I wouldn't have believed it. But she is a deceitful, filthy jerk. She should have been a politician. I wish killing was legal because I would kill your brother with that." My grandfather smashed his fist against the wall, shattering his hand. "Remember, Jennifer, it wasn't my choice. The two families concluded it was best for everyone, after listening to your mother's phone conversation with the judge. Joan and James have put both sides of the family's jobs and lifestyle at risk. I knew that they, too, needed to be safeguarded," I explained, still holding her in my arms. "I can replay that talk for you later. This will explain a lot of things. But for now, we need to relax and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day." Jennifer lifted her head from my shoulder and kissed me. Then, when she removed herself from me, she grabbed my hand. Turning to face her future husband, she addressed Stephen, "My love. Thanks for bringing me here. It reintroduced my father into my life. Dad, don't leave without speaking to me, okay?" I lovingly kissed her cheek. I agreed with that after finishing the rest of the bud. I let out a large burp. Everyone let out a loud roar. I overheard Jennifer's comment. "Now that is the father I know." He used to repeat the entire alphabet in a lengthy, loud burp. Bill and I went back to get some cold ones. Jennifer was never away from Stephen, yet her gaze was always fixed on me. "You astound me," Bill said. "I was crying in my beer last night after my wife admitted she was chased, caught, and slipped. She even stated that she didn't enjoy the entire experience. You sat there not saying anything. Now I see why what you went through makes me feel like what I'm dealing with is nothing but breadcrumbs. It has given me a whole new perspective. How you handled it, I'll never understand. But now I understand why you walk alone. Are you now willing to provide me any advice?" I laughed and responded, "I'll have Connie go through marriage therapy with you. Tell her you need to understand what drove her to do what she did before you can truly forgive her. Each session will reinforce her own feelings of shame and guilt." I noticed it when I explained why I hadn't seen Jennifer in a long time. Connie still loves you. That's why she feels so strongly about her quilt. It will be a period of time in which both of you will be able to bring this situation to a close with lasting healing and forgiveness. I approve of your son's choice of a woman, which made us both roar. We returned to join the party. We'd pretty well cleared up everything Bill and Connie had cooked. Bill stood up with Connie by his side, catching everyone's attention. "Most of you are unaware that our son Stephen graduated debt-free because to a private scholarship offered by our dear friend and future father-in-law, Charlie. Jennifer, welcome to our family. If you have half the integrity and wisdom that your father does." "My son is a truly blessed individual," Bill said. Connie told my new daughter and son, "Remember that in your journey as man and wife, you are only human at times. There will be situations created by the other that you believe you cannot overcome." Bill and I felt we'd reached that point, but we received some excellent advice. As a result, we shall seek outside professional assistance. Remember, it's easy to say sorry, but it's difficult to go on if you don't understand why something happened. Never allow pride stand in the way of your marriage. Everyone agreed, so I offered another toast for them. Later, when I was doing my rounds, I said farewell. Connie approached me, dropped a kiss on my cheek, and said, "Thank you for convincing my husband to give us another chance. We will seek counseling to attempt to sort things out. My family owes you so much." I searched around for Jennifer, but she was nowhere to be seen, so I entered the house and went to the front door. I observed 2 suitcases by the front door. "I hope you aren't leaving without me, Dad." My daughter spoke. "Steve agrees that since we're home, I should stay with you. It will allow us to reconnect with one another. After all, we both anticipate my biological father to lead me down the aisle." I lost it again. It was hilarious watching her drive the ancient Ford home. She'd never driven a Standard in her life. I just watched while mentally calculating the cost of a new gearbox because she kept using the clutch as a brake, and her inexperience caused her to grind the gears. Her jaw dropped when she saw the double-curved gravel driveway leading up the hill to my house. She stalled at least 5 times. It made me laugh. However, it was a simple memory. I would treasure the rest of my life as soon as we moved into my house. I heated the wood stove to take the chill off the evening, then gave her a royal tour after planning her baggage and her new room. By the end of the tour, she had fallen in love with my log home. Each of the bedrooms was constructed as if it were a master bedroom, with their own bathrooms. The open kitchen with a pantry off to the side, open floor, dining area, and living room made the space feel larger, with the office room, half bathroom, and stairs at the end. We'd saved the office or computer room for last so I could let her play the conversation. My grandfather had recorded so many years ago. After hearing it, she asked for a copy, so I copied it onto a stick and handed it to her. I also copied the video of making love. She noted that the files were originally created 2 days before my supposed demise. I left her crying and grieving, knowing she was going through the full range of emotions, from love to hatred. The raw truth of hearing someone you love's voice from their own mouth, confirming that all they had told you in your life was a lie, had to shatter one's trust and faith. I had gone into the kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the couch facing the window, watching the village lights below. When she finally came out to join me, I could see the puffiness in her tears and swollen eyes. She sat down alongside me, so I took her in my arms and embraced her without saying anything. My daughter spoke just as the cups were nearly empty. All my life, I've been told. They became closer as they lamented your passing, only to discover they had fallen in love, and then they married. Jennifer stated it was the state's largest wedding that year. My mother's voice proves that everything they stated was a lie. I'm still having trouble understanding their coldness towards you. I wonder if it was done out of hate. Mother claims to have loved you until your death. It is making me doubt if everything they said to us was true. It will take time for you to figure it out. Heck, I still don't get it all. Worse, there may not be an appropriate explanation as to why I responded. If this information is revealed, their marriage may not be lawful. James's re-election bid to the Senate will fail. I have a copy of the non-disclosure agreement I had to sign with the judge and your mother's father. It describes what I had to accomplish and why it had to be done. I'll give you a copy before you depart. They snatched your children from you and altered our lives in ways we will never understand. Jen responded, They were acting like gods. The only thing I don't understand is why you allowed them. First and foremost, they had built me a crutch. My grandfather believed till his death that they had everything prepared. They assumed that the rest of the family on both sides had too much to lose and would go to any length to hide it. Their family's long-term conduct proven them correct. So there was no negative impact on your mother or my brother. As a result, they kept everything. My prior company lost a significant amount of their reserve funds. My ex took the company public and changed my equity into shares to raise much-needed funds. In terms of public perception, it was out of sight and out of memory. Both the judge and your mother's father put offshore funds into a new LLC formed in my name to assist me rebuild my life far away. I explained to John and James that a wealthy family could find a way to make everything disappear. They relied on that fact. They relied on it, as time has shown. So now everything I do goes through the LLC, so I don't have any personal income to declare. This was done to make it difficult for anyone to find me. The worldwide corporation is in a tax-free haven, and every penny I receive comes from retained earnings. My computer room is where I manage. The LLC has several successful investments, I explained. My grandfather warned me that the truth will eventually come out, but I had to promise him I'd wait till it happened. Only then would I be free. He stated that the truth about what happened will bring the two of them down. Now, you know that when I escort you down the aisle, many people will see my face. There is no way they can conceal it. Their past will start to unwind. It will become a major public controversy. The business here provides me the appearance of leading a normal life, I stated. Our wedding is scheduled for the 6th of August. They've already leased the hall. I booked the chapel and sent out the invites. Grandfather Barnes was going to lead me down the aisle. But after he hears about our talk, he will gladly give up his seat for you, Jen stated. With my media connections back home, I'd like to have the information on the stick released on the Sunday before my wedding and the search for your death certificate to begin. I want them to pay for what they've done. Do you give me permission to notify your father that you are alive when the conversation is finally released? Why didn't you remarry and start a new life? Yes. You can tell my father, though I assume he is already aware that I am still alive. The solution to the second question is rather straightforward. Your mother and I have not divorced. I replied that I was not legally dead. Thus, I could not remarry. In my heart, I couldn't let my desires and needs to harm another person. The price I had to pay was to live a single existence. My ideals, ethics, and standards would prevent me from behaving in the same way. I told her it had finally hit home since Jen's face revealed the element of surprise for the first time in her life. She recognized the differences between her mother, my brother, and me. She had to realize that the difference was like night and day. Dad, you've been imprisoned. They deprived you of your life and children. They made it hard for you to form a new family. You were put in a box and compelled to play their games according to their rules. You are free, yet it is still constrained. Does this make sense? Jen asked. Yes, it does. However, it was equally my fault because I might have refused to go along. I responded. Instead, I decided to prioritize the needs of the entire two families. I left her and returned to the computer area, where I took a large binder from the wall-mounted shelf. Returning to her, I set the binder in front of her and instructed her to begin looking while I refilled our glasses. Jen was amazed. It was a binder book filled with her entire life's recollections. Every announcement, public appearance, location where she played, and copies of her report cards. I had documented everything I could about her life. I'd got it all. She was startled by how much she'd forgotten. We talked till the early hours of the morning as she expressed her perspective on the experiences I'd never shared. She went to bed knowing that she will always be cherished by me. I told her that I had a binder just as filled for each of her sisters and that I planned to share it with them someday. She stayed for 2 weeks, splitting her time between Stephen's family and myself. By the time she departed, we were closer than we had ever been. I felt grateful to have her back in my life. On the last Friday of July, an order was issued for me to buy short the stock of a firm I previously owned. Its current worth was $129 per share. I was gambling with my future. By the end of the day, I had more than 1 million shares. Jennifer's mother was the current CEO. All of my initial shares should be held in trust for my children until the age of 25. That was how it was set up, but it may have been changed after I departed 15 years ago. They calculated the company's market worth to be around $45 per share bill. Connie and I would fly out the following Thursday on a private jet that I had reserved. Jennifer had kept her pledge of silence, but she called me every day to keep me updated on what was going on with Stephen's phone. My stockbroker had been instructed to continue buying shares every day until August 5th, and then only sell the shares purchased at the highest price to pay the margins required on that market day. The exchange between the deceased judge and my wife made headlines Sunday morning, along with a video of Joan giving up her body and soul to my brother. An erotic website crashed because the video became too hot. The Democratic media gobbled it up big time. By the end of the day, there was a full-fledged hunt for my death certificate, divorce records, and any other material pertaining to the settlement of my estate. Questions were made regarding how I should have died if I had been murdered. My daughter called at 11 p.m., which was 7 o'clock on the West Coast, in New York. She thoroughly enjoyed the news coverage. Her mother and stepfather were panicking. Jennifer, her sisters, Judy, and Joe had been attempting to gain clarity from their mother about everything. Jonah James refused to answer any of their inquiries. One of the questions they asked was whether our father was still alive. Jen then said that the second bombshell would be released overnight. Those who read it stated it appeared that the family, under the supervision of James and Jones Barnes, forced me to disappear. The accounts to which the family appeared to have sent the monies had never existed, adding to the speculation that I was set up to be killed. She then stated that she was going to summon my father into his office and gave him the phone. As my father spoke, I heard his office door close. "Hello?" I answered, "Hello, Dad." "John, is that really you?" he inquired gently. "How are you doing, son?" "Yes, it is. I'm good. Jen can fill you in." "How?" His mother. "How much do you know?" I responded. "We found out about the whole affair approximately a week after the publishing of the story of your self-deletion and why they thought it was essential. We're a little older, but we're both really healthy. All things considered, you will be proud of how well your daughters have turned out. But tell me how." "Jennifer, figure it out," my father inquired. "She discovered me by mistake. It turns out her intended is the son of a close friend. His family hosted a cookout to introduce her and celebrate his graduation from university. When Stephen led me over to her, she turned to face me and recognized me immediately away. We have remained in contact ever since. I claimed I needed to stay hidden until the wedding, so I'm flying in on Thursday night with the groom's parents and family. Do you believe I can stay hidden if a chopper drops me down at your estate? I'll make sure the landing pad lights are on, and we'll give the personnel a few additional paid days off. Your mother will be pleased to make a couple dinners for the two of us. Please notify Jen of your expected arrival time." My father told me after a few words that he was not going to tell my mother. He wanted it to be a total surprise. Early Monday morning in the European markets, according to Facebook, and share values of my old company had plunged by more than $20 at the opening bell. I purchased another 1,000,000 shares for $101.01 each, buying them short that afternoon as prices continued to fall. I placed a buy order for 4,000,000 shares at $1.45 per share, hoping to get it to bottom out and then sell all of the shares I presently possess at $1.65 per share. The mass media mania led by CNN was destroying James and John Barnes and everything associated with them. Incest and possibly murder in the preparation of a cook dominated the printed page. James Barnes, a Republican, let CNN's Anderson Cooper rage and rave like a crazy, milking the situation for all it was worth. CNN's ratings were enormous. They had a large gathering of reporters parked outside their front gates as a result of what the media had revealed. On Thursday morning, the FBI revealed that it was investigating my disappearance. My old company reported that its CEO, John Barnes, had taken a buyout. Everyone knew she'd been forced out. Her involvement with the firm was ruining them. The stock's value began to stabilize at $1.35 per share. On Friday afternoon, the stock started to rise. However, personal issues for my brother James Barnes began to emerge. He was now subject to a Senate ethics probe. There were hourly calls in the Senate and in the media for him to quit. In his only public appearance, he repeated the story of how John and he had been seriously involved. Only after my reported self-deletion did I realize that the conversation between the former judge and his wife had to be made up. The footage of them making out had to have been made later. CNN announced that they would conduct a voice audit to determine if the voices of both sides in the discussion could be authenticated. They discovered a video of James publicly proclaiming that I had committed self-destruction and highlighted the fact that no death certificate had been discovered as of yet. On Friday, Jones's father announced his abrupt retirement from the Senate owing to chronic health issues. His daughter's long-term actions had brought him down. For him, it had gotten scorching. On Friday, the shares of my old company closed at $1.59 each. My purchase of the shares for less than $1.45 had been finalized at dusk on Thursday night. The chopper began its descent as it lowered itself. After the pilot had shut down, I could see my parents heading out of the back of their house to greet me. I emerged from beneath the whirling blades and scooped up the luggage. He'd gotten out. As soon as I had cleared the rotating blades, I straightened up and let my mother see my face. My father had to support her when her knees buckled from grief and shock. It had been more than 15 years since I had seen their faces. Mom kept crying. "My baby has arrived home." She spent the next 2 days acting like an overprotective mother hen, attempting to fatten me up because she thought I was too thin. Homemade dishes have never tasted so amazing. At 5 minutes to 2, Jennifer stepped out of the church entrance on Saturday, signaling that I should depart the limo. As I climbed up the stairs towards her, a CNN reporter captured me on live video and inquired who I was. I turned around and, with a straight expression, remarked, "I am the walking dead." I then moved forward to stand next to the bride. Jennifer looked amazing, after kissing each other on the cheek. We strolled arm in arm. Each of our faces expressed pride. The cameraman had caught it all. I captured John's shot from the rear, and her bum still looked amazing as she led the bridal party down the aisle to the front. She didn't look particularly horrible from behind. She still held a bomb. A man would die for this. The flower girl's ring-bearers followed, dropping rose petals as they proceeded. Joanne came next, and Judy was slightly ahead of us. I advised Jennifer to relax, which prompted Judy to look back. I lifted my index finger to my mouth, telling her to be quiet. Judy mouthed to her sister, "You discovered Dad holding back tears shortly before entering the main part of the church." Jennifer simply nodded her head, her face shining with excitement as she looked up at Stephen. I observed everyone was wondering where the best man was. They were unaware that he was walking his bride down the aisle. I observed Joan take her seat next to a man I thought to be James, if time had truly transformed him. He now had the traditional parent body and a bald spot on his head. Jennifer and I watched Joanne mount the steps in her place. Then she turned towards us as the tears began to pour. She put her palm over her lips to suppress her screams. It was almost as if she couldn't believe I was real. Then Judy was by her, holding her hand, and whispered in her ear. She, too, shared her sister's tears. I let go of my daughter and watched her climb the steps until she stood next to Stephen. "Who gives this lady away?" The father spoke. I replied, "Her mother and I do." Then I stepped inside and stood alongside Steve. The ceremony was amazing. Many people said it was the most emotional wedding they had ever witnessed because my 3 children's faces were filled with tears of delight. I couldn't help but notice that my daughter's mother and brother's features were absolutely white. Neither of them could look me in the eyes for the entire ceremony. Their gaze was focused on the evening events. I was asked several times how I came to be my son-in-law's best man. Had I introduced the two when we signed the form to register the marriage certificate? The Catholic father was taken aback when I signed my legal name. Almost all of the witnesses to this marriage who had previously known about me now knew that I was alive. Even though nothing was said, I could tell that cell phones were being utilized all over the place. We then discovered there had been 3 live broadcasts. The judge is the senator. By the end of the day, the plans had been put into action. Both perceived the situation as a mess. That would scandalize both families in every way. After serving in the Marines until shortly after the birth of the triplets, it was decided that I would be called back in. So for more than 3 years, I was hidden in plain sight, battling the Taliban with brothers in arms. There was no mission that I wouldn't volunteer for. They claimed I had been driven. I had a reputation for being extremely hardcore. However, it was a malfunctioning set of body armor that ultimately did him in. As a result, I had 8 bullet scars on the front of my chest. I'd just escaped with my life after receiving my discharge papers. I was a major, but not anymore. I'd traveled to the Cayman Islands to restructure my finances before determining what to do with the remainder of my life. The judge in my grandmother's case had met me on the family estate. My grandma suggested that if I couldn't decide what to do, I should take a chance and throw a dart on a map to see where it led. That dumb suggestion had led me here. The celebratory line was hilarious. Judy and Joan stood on either side of me. They took full advantage of the opportunity to introduce me to everyone. Their features glowed with pride. Nonetheless, I didn't feel right in a tux. Joan and James were the last to pass through. Stephen was polite, but Joan wasn't, as she appeared to be in complete astonishment. "Mother Jennifer said you should know. Dad didn't find me. I discovered him. It was I who knew everything about what you both did. Released. Dad reluctantly gave me copies of it so I could show my sisters what had really transpired. He had no idea what I was doing. What James and you did to every one of us is unforgivable. I determined it needed to be set straight. I had to demonstrate that he was not the failure you both made him out to be." Joan was infuriated. Her rage made her want to shout, but she held her tongue and walked away without speaking to me. Joan was wondering herself, is my daughter attempting to destroy my life? James stayed there for a few moments looking at me before saying anything. "We need to talk. We need to work this out, John," James replied softly, staring at me and trying to figure me out. "We are working on it as we speak. But you know, I was there listening via speaker when the judge and Joan spoke. I responded without extending my hand. James glanced at me in disbelief as if he had no idea. "I shall show you both the same consideration that you showed me, which we all know was none. You made your bed. Now deal with it," I said with a chilly tone. "I'll enjoy seeing the consequences." We stood watching the pair walk out the door. My 3 daughters noticed a large smile on my face. "There's something wrong," according to Steve. I just laughed, knowing that as soon as they left the church steps, the 2 of them would be served. Joan was being served with a divorce on the grounds of infidelity. James for the alienation of attachment. It would be covered by the media again. The nightmare for them was about to get much worse. It was time for us to go to the park and take pictures for their wedding books. So the bridal party hopped into a large limo and had a glass of champagne on the way there. Jennifer described everything to her 2 sisters, who were hugging me tightly. They were astonished to find that Jen had spent 2 weeks with me while getting to know her in-laws. My 3 daughters had grown up to be stunning ladies. They made me proud. Jen detailed how we went through all of the information I had gathered about her over the years. Jen stated she had the idea that I knew more about her than she did about herself. Then she said, "He has one on each of you, just as thick." It demonstrated to me, Jen, that he never ceased loving us. The only awkward time throughout the photo shoot was when all 5 of us, including our parents, were present. We got around it by including Connie and Bill. Between the rest of us and their inability to get 3 of us to smile, James and Joan were in a bad mood. Their world was falling quickly. My identity was now revealed, and the media was having a field day. The Walking Dead was alive. It became the media's cry. Everything they thought they knew was being rehashed, as the Democratic media always does. Everything was being taken to extremes. The bridal dinner was extravagant. Then it was time for the toast from the best man and father of the bride. I threaded it with tact. I explained honestly, saying that because to his lovely parents, whom I considered closest friends, we had formed a deep link, and that I saw him as the son I never had. I went on to relate some of the amusing circumstances we found ourselves in and how they had brought us closer together. I must admit that when he introduced me to his bride, I was taken completely by surprise. I concluded by adding that I hoped they had the insight to grasp and hang on to all of their dreams. My mother's face lit up with pride when Stephen stood up. I nearly lost it. He began by remarking, "It's rare for a groom to say that his father-in-law is his best friend. Jennifer's father funded for my post-secondary studies and has provided guidance through many difficult periods." That day in June, I realized that John was Jennifer's biological father, which shocked us all. I'll never forget my father's words when he said I had to be a lucky guy to have Jennifer as my wife to both of my fathers. "I'd like to thank you for making me the man I am." When the bride and groom began their dance, they dominated the room. To this day, I have never seen a more gorgeous bride. Judy and Joe kept me on the dance floor, both wanting to spend as much time with me as possible away from my mother. They had complete control over my time. The master of ceremonies appeared on stage to declare that it was time for the bride and her father to dance. Before we proceed with the bride's and groom's approval, I'd like to offer General David Bloomberg the microphone. The general walked forward. He stated that he came coming to present 3 medals to Hard Hat Charlie. I had to laugh. Hard Hat? Charlie was a major in command of a SEAL platoon. He stated that they had gone on a mission that is still classified today, only to discover upon arrival. It had been an enemy trap. Our assessment of the scenario had been completely erroneous. The 2 platoons that accompanied them were likewise stuck. They were encircled. Man 4 guys underwent an investigation into the bungled mission. They described it as a modern-day Custer's last stand. After 2 days of intense battle, with our soldiers nearing weariness, word came down the line to load up their bazookas to the brim and send them along. A typical Marine can carry one of them, along with all of their equipment. Hard Hat. Charlie had removed all of his clothing and accessories. He wore nothing except his bulletproof vest, helmet, boots, and underwear. Everyone let out a loud roar. Everyone around him said he was crazy, but he told his second-in-command, "Win or lose, if we don't gamble, we'll all perish. Because to everyone I care about, I am already the Walking Dead. At least I'll die in my boots. I must give my guys a fighting chance." He armed his body with 2 of these bazookas. After throwing a bunch into a clearing, he put on his helmet. He put a cigar in his mouth, rose up, and proceeded into a clearing, letting those babies rip. His first hit was on an ammo reserve, causing several explosions to spread throughout, scattering the well-hidden opponent. After shooting a few more shells, he swung around and shot a few more shots into pre-selected targets up the slope. He was hit 23 times while firing before collapsing, but only 8 of those were serious. The enemy's back was broken as a result of his actions. They ran like dogs. To this day, every man who served alongside him says that he was the sole reason they survived. So I'm here to award Major Jonathan Charles Barnes with 2 Purple Hearts and 1 Silver Star, the 3rd. My only regret is that I was unable to perform it in front of his troops. I walked up and the general pinned them on before saluting me. My parents and 3 girls were really proud. My daughter Jen finally took me to the floor for the father-daughter dance. She'd selected an old sicko song, "Your Father is Home." It was a highly emotional dance for both of us. They announced the son and mother dance. I went over and asked my mother to join Stephen and Connie on the floor. You could tell how much it meant to her. It was written across her face. Later, the bride and groom left to change into their going-away attire, and when they returned, Jen discovered an envelope addressed to the bride and groom on the floor next to her. Inside was a cashier's bank draft for $2 million made out to the 2 of them, with the inscription, "Follow your dreams." Jen took the initiative and started the ball. My signature appeared on the draft. I slept in until nearly noon on Sunday, having gone to bed about 6 a.m. after the wedding reception ended. Judy and Joanne had taken me to a late-night Chinese restaurant for a midnight supper. Before we went to bed, both daughters requested their first private time with their father. We had swapped phone numbers and current addresses, and my beloved girls had agreed to spend a few weeks with me at home after a crap, a shave, and a shower. I had dressed in my typical attire: blue jeans, a white t-shirt with a blue jean long-sleeve shirt left unbuttoned and hanging down the sides, black socks, and cheap Walmart running shoes. Brand names and high fashion did not interest me. I felt the richest when I was dressed like this and drove my vintage Ford pickup. I was just an ordinary individual who led a basic lifestyle. I downed the stairs to locate a home for Mom and Dad, Bill and Connie, the rest of their offspring, 7 of them. And I have 2 daughters. Connie was telling my girls about how I had saved their marriage and how, for over 10 years, every one of their acquaintances had attempted to find out if I was straight or not. Your father, although not being religious, had the patience of a job. He never made any of us feel uncomfortable when we tried to set him up. We were all startled when Jean named him Dad because we had no idea. Until then, we thought the most important item in his life were his 2 black female cats. After saying hi to everyone, I walked to the kitchen to get some coffee and smoke. Mom joined me and asked what I wanted to eat, so I told her, 6 pancakes, 3 soft eggs with runny yolks, and 4 slices of bacon. She was ecstatic and began pulling out her pants. The cooks moved out of her way. They were aware she was preparing for her son. Dad came in as I sat there, catching me up on what was going on. It seems that the media was having a field day. The headline in the New York Times was, "The Walking Dead is alive." CNN had been covering my military history and had interviewed some of the people I had served with. Most of them expressed surprise that I had survived after being taken down. My father had to laugh when one of them said, "The one thing you never told Charlie was that it couldn't be done because he always found a way to do it." He seemed to relish making his bosses angry. As a leader, he would only push his people as hard as he pushed himself under his command. We all became better men. It was revealed that Joan was married to 2 brothers, and with no record of a divorce, I must have been one of the longest-known cocks. They claimed Senator James Barnes purchased an expensive 304 while crawling between her legs. I couldn't keep my smile hidden. CNN aired an afternoon special encouraging that lifestyle. Feminists applauded her for her lifestyle choices. However, even their comments were condemned. A news crew had been dispatched to interview residents in our small town. Most people have only positive things to say, but it was remarkable how things escalated simply for 5 minutes of fame. Dad laughed. The media has blown this up and created a huge problem. The way they muck things up, by the time this is over, the country will believe you're a saint and you won't have said anything. Both Joan and James are screwed. I stood up and refilled my coffee just as Mom handed me my plate and sat across from me, watching me eat. She was still getting used to the fact that the family's infant had returned home. Joan told Dad, "Your brother claims he had no knowledge of what Mom said to the judge because he went looking for you." "Do you think that may be true?" "Who knows?" I responded. "We know that for 3 years she did him on the side, behind my back. Humans cannot remember everything we said or did not say. They had to have talked about the consequences of getting caught and what they would do if that happened. Your mother felt safe enough to say what she did that day. She was mentally prepared for what occurred. Her own choice of language demonstrates it in any case. They expected the family to handle it. They used us all. God. Joanne said you looked at it. Not personally, but in terms of how it affected everyone in their immediate surroundings. This paints a different picture. So who figured it all out? Mother James. James has never been a leader. Even in the Marine Corps, he played things safe. Your mother and I are both action-oriented individuals who are willing to take chances, so it had to be her. I responded. Jennifer informed me that your gift last night, if handled correctly, would set them up for life. She wouldn't tell me how much it was, but she asked me to tell you that they are investing it for years because they don't want to be in a position where they can just flutter it away, Joanne replied quietly. Just so you know, the strands of what was done are only beginning to unravel. No one knows what will happen in the end. What people with money and power will do remains unknown until it is disclosed. On Saturday, your mother was served. We've got time. I said, your sister is being really wise. When your sister and you marry, you will receive the same amount. When did she receive the paperwork? Joanne asked. James was served the same minute she left the church. I'm suing him for alienation of affection. Either way, they're screwed. I had the family trust frozen since I am not dead. The lawyers will scrutinize everything within. If they put their own money in as a result of what happened, I might get theirs as well, I explained. James will have to pay a few million to settle the lawsuit. Joanne glanced at me silently for a time before saying, crap. The trust owns the house they live in. I believe everything is. They may be screwed. It's definitely a disaster. I feel bad for us. All. Lawyers will end up taking a lot, whatever. This was done to safeguard those who no longer required protection. Unfortunately, the innocent are always injured. I mentioned that Judy had been listening to the exchange. I could tell she had something on her mind. So when she asked if she could speak with me alone, I was not surprised. With Dad's permission, we slipped into his office. Dad, Judy explained, I have a female acquaintance whose ex-boyfriend has been abusive in the past. She has court orders against him, and he has been jailed several times. He's scheduled to be released again next week, and we're both worried he'll come after us again. She's an RN. I work with her and share an apartment. She has begun an 8-week vacation and has some money in the bank. Mental and emotional. If it weren't for her job, she'd be a complete wreck. She needs to be somewhere where she feels protected and comfortable. I think she needs to leave. She attended the wedding last night and for the first time in a long time expressed a strong interest in a man who she described as tall and carrying a tiny stick. Is it okay if I introduce her to you? Of course it is, but we're flying home tomorrow. So what exactly are you attempting to persuade me to do? I asked. Based on what Joanne has informed us about her 2 weeks with you and what you two did. I want you to take her home with you. It sounds like an ideal scenario for her to fully heal. Bill and Connie are wonderful folks, so I am confident she will fit right in, Judy remarked. If you are unwilling to do it for her, will you do it for me? She that essential to you? I said. So who is this dude she's interested in? Yes, she is. I regard her as an elder sister who should have married a wonderful man years ago. The man she is interested in is you. She laughed. With your past. I know you can keep her safe, my dear daughter. Are you attempting to set me up? I laughed back. Remember, I'm elderly. You can answer this for yourself. She'll be here in an hour, she announced with a wide grin. Remember, Dad? The age does not matter. The things a guy will do for his daughters. Joan and I had married right after she got out of high school. Her father introduced me to her while he was on an international tour. I was in my second year, and she was 15. For me, it was love at first sight. I joined the Marines with my father's persuasion and approval. At 16, it took to it like a fish in water and excelled. My drill sergeant claimed I was old before my time. Being psychologically tough and determined allowed me to advance up the ladder faster. The only thing I found challenging was pursuing my study while living in the barracks. Thankfully, schoolwork had always been easy for me. I graduated with my degree in 3 years instead of 5. I had 6 years in when the twins were born and got my first discharge when they were 2. I thought myself a young 44-year-old father. My dad always thought I was an overachiever and was eager to finance my company, and away I went. Thanks to the age of computers, and for years my brokerage company went North America broad. I was always traveling due of business. I must admit that I was too much hands-on. Dad and I were in the backyard shooting a few baskets when Judy came out with her friend. As we watched them stroll towards us, I noticed Judy's girlfriend had long, natural blonde hair. Dad stated she has a set of bumps much like your mom. Good breeding stock, he observed with a chuckle and added, I adore them when they're constructed for comfort and not for speed. I learned that Barbara Ellen Patterson was 33, had never been married, and had grew up in a little town in Ohio. She was 5'9", which made 3 inches shorter than me. She had big shoulders, a great rack, and could play a dang fine game of hoops. She and my dad made mincemeat out of Judy and me. After a couple of games, the ice had been broken and we began conversing like we were old friends. After talking for a few with her, I excused myself and went into my dad's office to make a few phone calls. I eventually opened the door and called to Barbara and Judy to come in. I told Barbara that I had one of the directors of the local hospital where I resided on the line who wanted to chat to her as she talked to him. Judy and I stepped out into the hall. "What's happening on, Dad?" Judy asked. I responded, "She's being offered a full-time employment in the emergency department starting in a month, if her references check out. Which, based on what you've told me, I assume that they will. If she accepts, she can hitch a ride with me when I go home tomorrow and remain with me until she finds a place. It will be up to you to forward to her or get rid of whatever she can't take with her. The pay won't be as high, but the cost of living is lower." Judy hugged me and gave me a huge big kiss on the cheek. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you would come through. I had discussed this with Joanne, and she felt you would too. You have made it possible that she can finally put the past in the past. Thank you for putting her free." Barbara accepted the position. The transformation she experienced was incredible. Her genuine warmth and love began to shine through. We were all overjoyed to see it. My father, a lawyer, drew up a power of attorney that would allow Judy to act on Barbara's behalf. I suggested to Barbara that she create a new email account and text everyone she wanted to stay in touch with, reminding them that she would be sending them her new phone number and that she would keep them updated via the new email account. That within a week, Barb, Judy, and Joanne were overjoyed. They hurried out the door to assist Barbara in getting ready to leave. The jet took off at 4 p.m. and returned to port shortly before 8 p.m. Connie and Barbara bonded along the way. Bill and I discussed how impressed he was by my parents and girls. He warned me to be cautious because Barb was more gentle. My old company's shares was now valued at $103. CNN would receive 2 envelopes from a courier tomorrow morning, carrying my death certificate and the location of my grave. It was shortly after 9 p.m. when we arrived at Spam. I drove by the small hospital so Barbara could see where she would work, before leaving town for my home. Barbara appeared happy the farther we moved from the East Coast. I drove the truck up my driveway. I realized I needed a second vehicle, Spasms. The population was now around 3,000. It was developing into a tiny tourist town. Before getting her bags, she told me that she hadn't been in a log home since she was a child, and we strolled out to the front yard so she could see how my house looked over the hamlet below, with the log mill, boats, and docks, as well as the endless view of the Pacific Ocean. She loved the postcard image. As we entered the house, I informed her that dusk would fall between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. I informed her she was the second person to ever stay at my house. We had no idea she was never going to go. I was up before Barbara on Tuesday morning. It still surprises me how gorgeous and rejuvenated she looked when she walked down the stairs that morning. It was as if she had stepped out of the clouds and into the sunshine without makeup. She exuded rustic style, clad in blue jeans and a tank top. She'd blend right in with the coffee in the urn, sleepyhead. I said, "Sugar's on the counter." "The box in the refrigerator contains half and half." "And good morning to you too," she said. "Is there anything new in Charlie's world today? Let's turn on CNN to find out." I replied with a smile. I used the remote to turn on the TV while watching her make herself a cup, then looked in the fridge and the cupboards. She insisted that we go grocery shopping if she was going to cook. I overheard her telling herself, "It's a beautiful house, but it needs a woman's touch to transform it from a bachelor pad to a home." It reminded me of something my mother might say. CNN had a field day after receiving the death certificate. They noticed that the signature on it was from a doctor with a questionable background. He was now serving time. A news crew was dispatched to the graveyard, which was known to be frequently used by the mob. Barb noticed me smiling and remarked, "You knew I had to admit I did." I then stated that the judge, in order to protect himself, set this up several years after his death. I inherited his estate in the Cayman Islands. I realized he would make them pay. I asked the caregiver to mail this information in. She smiled and explained that Judy, Joe, and she had spent the majority of Sunday night and Monday morning analyzing everything about the issue. They all agreed that Joan and James were receiving what they deserved. "All of you girls seem to despise what their mother done. Your daughter made it clear that if I did anything to injure you, she would hold me accountable. All three of them believe you can walk on water." I had to pledge. Judy provides daily updates on how we're getting along. Barbara replied when I told her what I thought about you on Saturday night. After the general finished his little speech, she began to prepare. I questioned her why she was doing what she was doing, and she answered, "My father is a good man who deserves a good, honest woman in his life. After our coffees, let's travel over to the port so you can get your Washington State driver's license, apply for your nursing license, and do some serious grocery shopping, if that's acceptable. They have a Golden Corral there, so we can eat an early lunch." I said, "Sounds like a plan for the day. If we can arrange to stop at the hospital so that I can go to the Human Resources Department and fill out a formal application." She replied and handed me her phone. "I need you to include our legal address in the memoranda so I can get it after we stop for coffee before heading out." She asked me if she could drive. I let her, and she smiled a mile wide. She handled the clutch as if she'd been doing it her entire life. When I expressed my surprise at how well she was doing, she explained that she had been driving tractors since she was 9. If you're in the country and don't drive a standard, it's like saying you'll never amount to anything. After lunch, we went to the hospital and completed our tasks. Then she went to the state local office, where she was informed that her replacement licenses will arrive within a week. Next, Walmart. The groceries we purchased filled the truck. We'd overloaded it. I wasn't expecting the new copper non-stick pots and pans. The new silverware consisted of a complete set of 12 plates. Her explanation was that my pitiful kitchenware demonstrated that I did not cook, which was correct. While she was in the hospital's Human Resources Department. I had called my insurance provider, so our final trip was at the local Jeep dealership, where I purchased a brand new, fully outfitted Jeep 4X4. My insurance agent faxed over evidence of insurance so we could drive it home. She drove it home, following me the entire way. When we got home, she let me to unload the groceries. Then she told me to move out of her way and leave her alone so she could properly set up the kitchen. Dawn dishwater soap was used right away once it was unpacked. She scrubbed every cabinet before unpacking anything. It seemed as if she was establishing a new home. I watched in awe as she organized the kitchen and made it her own. I should have noticed the warning signs, but I was blind. I entered the living room and turned on the news. If it hadn't been so tragic, I'd have laughed. They had discovered my grave and wanted to know if I was still alive. Who was buried there? It would take the FBI to respond to that. I heard Barbara's cell phone ring and was able to obtain that information. Judy was getting an update, so I yelled, "Tell Judy you have not assaulted me yet." Barb did and then yelled back, "Your daughter claims you can be a real a-hole." I laughed. I knew I was too old for her, so that was it. She didn't finish until nearly 10 o'clock. To celebrate, I poured us both a tall glass of homemade blackberry wine, and we watched the town lights twinkle below before retiring to our separate beds. When I awoke, I could smell bacon being fried. Coffee was produced. Barbara was dressed in a handcrafted full-length housecoat and matching nightgown. I mentioned that it was hand-stitched and inquired how long it had taken her to make it. She mentioned 2 months. But how did they know? I responded, "Because you can't get that quality in any store." She smiled and remarked, "I like a man who notices small details." Breakfast was nearly ready. 6, 3 runny eggs, and 4 pieces of bacon for me with warmed pure maple syrup. I inquired how you knew that was my favorite. She said, "Your mother told me, but you can add the eggs to your own pancakes." She laughed. I asked her, "What else has my mother told you?" She grinned and said, "That's for me to know and you to discover." I smiled and told myself, I could get used to this. I told her I was going to check in at the store and pick up the plates after paying the taxes cheaply. She said that was all right since she had found the tape measure in my toolbox in the pantry and was going to measure blinds and curtains before I left. She kissed my cheek and added, "Remember, dinner is at 6 and always will be when I'm not working." Then it struck me. She wanted to make this a home, not simply a place to sleep. I returned at midday and loaded the plates into the Jeep before coming inside. Barbara gave me wonderful news. The FBI was digging up my tomb that afternoon. We both wondered what they would discover. It was discovered that my death certificate had been produced the day before I re-enlisted. CNN was covering it live. I got a text from the lawyers requesting me to call. It found out that Joan sought a rapid divorce in the trust situation, which was handled independently. She would not argue on grounds of adultery. They believed that if they pursued that route, the time limit for granting the divorce would be lifted because she had already remarried. I told them to go ahead. Barb told me I was making the correct decision. She stated that she was finished measuring and that we needed to talk rod-style materials and pricing. I asked, "Why?" She answered, "Because this town is growing and it won't be long before more homes are built, giving them a direct view into your home. Furthermore, finishing the house will enhance value for the next 4 hours." We talked about each space and ordered the materials online. After spending $10,000, I inquired if she expected me to hang them when they arrived, and she answered absolutely. That is a man's job, but I can help. She decided she should check in with Judy, and we were grateful that she did. Judy had inside information about what they discovered in the coffin, which was packed, taped, and bubble-wrapped for protection, a Federal Express sealed envelope. When it was opened, it revealed a message that said, "Next time, James and Joan, when you try to kill someone, make sure the person you hire is competent." It was signed by me. When Barb hung up the phone, I let out a shout. She sought for an explanation. So I informed her that before I left to report, the judge had me sign several blank pages as if I were signing a letter. What they discovered must have been one of them. Barb was about to start supper when I received a phone call informing me that all of my buddies and their wives were on their way to welcome Barb to the neighborhood. I told her not to bother starting anything because we were going to have a house full. They wished to welcome Barb to our village and group. Apparently, Connie had spread the word that I had brought a classy lady back with me, and my children had agreed. All the females wanted to meet the lady who had managed to capture my interest. They would joke all night about how they needed to see it to believe it. Charlie finally had a girlfriend. Within 10 minutes, the entire group had arrived. I happily introduced Barb to everyone. We were hosting a potluck supper with country-style fried chicken, baked beans, nachos and cheese, potatoes, chips, fries, coleslaw, salad, fresh buns, 2 cases of beer, and pecan pie. Barb's meal selection was popular among all of the ladies. After introducing herself, she quickly settled in and began discussing with the ladies about the curtains, shades, and rods she had bought, stating that they would arrive on Friday. We decided to get together on Saturday afternoon and put them up. But she demanded they bring nothing since she would make a meal for everyone. Early Thursday morning, we went to a superstore in Port. Barb requested a large gas BBQ, a deep oil fryer, and a smoker with the necessary tanks. We ended up purchasing a patio set that could seat 8 people and included 8 extra seats, and we had it delivered the next day. I purchased pre-cut lumber to create a couple of tables. Friday morning, I began making her an outside cedar table that, when collapsible, would stand against the back outside wall. When pulled out and used, it would serve as the primary counter for persons receiving food. I stained it to match the stain on our log home and treated it in the same way. She adored it. Thank God, Ace Hardware pre-assembled. It saved a great deal of time. Saturday at noon, they brought their ladders, and the 5 of us quickly got the rods set up in all of the rooms. We let the ladies put up the drapes. I had to declare in front of everyone that Barb had a terrific sense of design and style, which made her happy. What we had done made the house appear even better, and I admitted it. I chuckled because Barb flushed. Bill pointed out that I'd need a garage and a storage space for my outdoor items before the winter weather came in. I had to admit that he was correct, but if I was going to build it right, I needed a secure route with a mudroom for coats and boots, all built with locks. Barb mentioned that we need place for 2 freezers. I groaned. Connie caught on and asked, "Are you already planning for more children?" I reddened, and everyone roared. Connie replied, "Poor Charlie, he's already henpecked and doesn't realize it." Everyone roared again. Barb had smoked and slow-cooked pound 20 of ribs, served a large potato salad, and made a fast, shredded, pickled cabbage relish in a standard salad. It was a hit with everyone, so all the ladies wanted to know how the cabbage was prepared, to reward her for all of her hard work. I prepared her breakfast on Sunday. Then, with friends, we took a cruise up the coast. Seeing how much she enjoyed what we were doing, I decided to take her to Seattle to go whale watching and spend the day at their market. When Judy contacted Barb, she confided to Judy that she was in love. What's the problem? I was too, but I would never move. I was too old, and I considered myself too set in my ways. It's been an intriguing week. We spent over 3 evenings designing and laying out the designs. No matter how hard I disagreed, my 4 best friends relished joking with me about how much I was in love. They were aware that I had a losing hand. The rock removal business would arrive next week to begin leveling off the additional space required. By the time they were finished, we would have county approval for a 4-bay garage, a built-in storage facility in the back with an in-law apartment above, and a 16-foot hallway to Barb's massive mudroom. James and Joan had been summoned to the FBI. Rumor had said that things were not going well. According to the polls, his chances of re-election are dwindling. The FBI has narrowed it down to 2 potential suspects who could have been recruited to carry it out. The attempted execution of me was difficult for them because of the absence of evidence. They were both being investigated. Friday, I received an interesting phone call from the president of the company I created. He wanted to know if I, as a large shareholder, was interested in becoming the new CEO. I asked for a week to think about it. He answered, yes. It somehow leaked, and the stock rose on the news, rising to the level of $139. Then, late Saturday, an extremely loud thunderstorm with lightning approached. I had no idea that it would permanently alter our relationship. It struck during the middle of the night. My bedroom door opened while I was lying in bed, listening to the heavy rain fall on my home's metal roof. That was when a massive bolt of lightning struck. Barb strolled in wearing an extremely slim, almost see-through, low-cut nightgown that barely covered her privates. She was breathtaking to behold. Her silhouette with the sheet lighting behind her wrapped her in a gold band, giving me a glimpse of her. I'd see in my fantasies. I feigned to sleep as she pushed the blankets aside and slid in next to me, her body shaking with fear. As soon as the second thunderclap rang out, the echo bounced off the walls. Her body was bound to mine. I could smell the wonderful perfume of new soap emanating from her body as she had washed before going to bed. The aroma of flesh against flesh filled my nose, giving me an instant hard turn sideways. She placed her leg over mine, wrapped her arm across my chest, and rested her neck against my shoulder. I hadn't been so close to a lady in years. I was a nervous wreck as she raised her head to kiss my cheek. I turned to face her and kissed her. A nice kiss escalated into a lengthy, lingering tongue kiss. We were unable to stop once we started. Emotions were fueling our appetites, frigid hands, exploration of one another's bodies, and pleasure. Pleasures. We saw it. It was a night of miracles and whispers as we both caught up on lost time. It wasn't simply love. We were making love. She was claiming me, marking me, and capturing my mind, heart, and soul. In the afterglow, we admitted each other, our emotions of love. It was around 10 a.m. when hunger compelled us to get out of bed. I went downstairs and turned on the coffee, waiting for it to brew in my pajamas. I called my daughter Judy. Judy expressed amazement to her father. "It's nice to hear your voice." "Thank you. However, I have a question. What did Barb say to you at Jennifer's wedding?" "I questioned her when she saw you in the wedding party." It was love at first sight. The more she learnt about you that night, the more she realized that her sentiments were genuine. She was watching you all night, She has been overjoyed since you returned home." "Don, what are your plans for hurting her?" Judy asked. I chuckled and replied, "Just between us. She slept on my bed last night. This morning we revealed to each other that we were in love." Judy became distraught, so I told her I would let her go and speak with her later. The coffee was almost done, so I cleaned the urine and filled it with hot water, then warmed our cups. I just completed that when the doorbell rang. It was FedEx with a special package from my attorney. It was my divorce document. The court waived the waiting time due to mitigating circumstances. I was a free guy. Barbara was coming downstairs. Her face shone with joy. Her cell phone rang and she answered it. She started giggling within seconds. After a few moments, she ended the call. "That was Judy." She said she had a question for me. "What was it?" I asked. She asked if it was appropriate to start calling me Mom. She responded before giving me another kiss. "You simply had to tell her, right?" I laughed. Barb said I needed to tell her that I had to make the first move since you would never do it. She was correct. I regarded myself as being ready to fall in love again. I poured our morning coffees and strolled over to the kitchen table. I mixed mine the way I liked it. Barb preferred hers black, so after grabbing her cup, she approached me but came to a halt when she noticed my lawyer's letter being picked up. She read it. The second page contained the certificate. She gazed at me through tears of excitement. I stood up and held her in my arms. "Is it time you met my parents?" she inquired after I answered. "Sure." She called her mother to see if the family still got together on the family farm over Labor Day weekend. When she said yes, she promised to come home for it. Her mother was thrilled. Instead, she announced on Monday that they would do it on Saturday because others had plans for Monday. Judy and Joanne both left before the end of summer. We spent one day simply browsing through their binders. Both my daughters and Barb were amazed by how much influence I had in my daughter's life. We landed at Cuyahoga County Airport, where a car rental and a small private plane awaited us. We then headed to a Holiday Inn with our stuff and booked a room. It was a stunning September day. The jet was scheduled to pick us up the following Tuesday. Barb hadn't gone home in 2 years, but she'd warned me that her father and 2 brothers had been in the military since I was the first man in her adult life. She was coming home, and I knew I'd be questioned to make sure I was good enough for their only kid. When we left the finish the next morning, she took us to the farm. We were early, I assumed because we were the third vehicle in the yard. Her mother dashed out of the porch, eager to welcome us before we turned off the car. She was in astonishment. Her only daughter was with a male. When her father heard the voices, he came out to see what all the hoopla was about. I was shocked. Her father was Bullfrog Patterson, my former drill sergeant. The first words out of his mouth were, "Crap." I assumed, like the other new recruits, that he was a loser. "Barb, what are you doing with the chicken?" "He cost me over $1,000, he said with a giggle, placing his hand to mine. I was intended to break him and get him to drop out, so I threw everything I could think of at him, and he thrived despite the fact that I was one of the best Marines I'd ever trained. That man can be as tough as a rock when necessary. He cost me 1,000 bets since I didn't believe he'd last. He proved to me the hard way that I was mistaken. Bullfrog stated it was Barb, and her mother glanced at me, shocked. I will not pull any punches. I went to have a man-to-man conversation with Barbara's father because I intended to ask for his daughter's hand. I had no idea that he was you. "Are you serious?" Mrs. Patterson inquired. "Yes, ma'am," I said firmly, noting Ball's big smile. "You got it." John was his only response. My beloved daughter could not have come home with a finer man. With that said, I got down on one knee and took the ring box from my pocket in front of her parents. I asked her to marry me. Barb, absolutely astonished, said yes. I rose up and slid the ring on, hoping it would fit. It did. After congratulating her and welcoming her to the family, I gave her a big kiss. Bill hugged her mother and father and said, "Let me get the keys to the truck and we'll go for a quick beer run. It will offer us an opportunity to discuss." Barb's mother was weeping for 2 reasons. Her daughter had returned home with a man her father approved of and had become engaged on the spot, Bowles. And my first trip was the local Legion for a couple beer drafts. He inquired if I had gotten divorced, and I responded yes. I recounted how I met his daughter and how he came to be. He knew I came from money and didn't need to inquire. Of course, he had to present me to everyone and proudly announce that I was his future son-in-law. Someone asked me how he earned the name Bullfrog. I said, "Let me explain. He was our drill sergeant during basic training, and it was his responsibility to pick us out. He felt that because I had joined at the age of 16, with my parents' agreement, I didn't want to be there. He hit me as hard as he could. Every mistake I made resulted in him adding something additional to me. My other recruits were aware of the situation and inquired why. One night in the barracks, one of the guys observed, "Man, you were really taking the crap. What do you think about him?" I commented, "He reminds me of a bullfrog sitting on a log trying to catch bugs." The trouble is that in his opinion, the guys liked it and started calling him Bullfrog, which stuck. We spent several $100s on beer and rye. I knew if he had his way, I'd be so intoxicated by the end of the day that I couldn't drive. By the time we returned, the yard was packed with cars. We brought some of the beer and Ryan to the house, where he drove his pickup around and parked to use the beer as needed. Barb and her mother were there to greet us. Barb slipped his hand inside mine. A voice in the audience cried, "Son of a jerk, hard hat." "Charlie, is this you?" I looked up and said, "Measly Mike, old dog. How are you doing, man? It's nice to see you, brother." Within seconds, we were hugging each other like brothers. We recognized right away that we were still excellent friends. Bill looked at us and said, "You guys know each other." "He's the best tech guy I've ever had under me," I said with a wide grin. Bullfrog had trained me, and I was unaware that he was Barbara's father. Bill asked, "John, why did he call you Hard Hat Charlie when I re-enlisted?" I began using my second name and advanced to major before being discharged. I said, "I got that name from my SEAL team on what would be my final mission." "So you are the hardest, Charlie. This saved my son's life." He summarized, and both Mike and I answered, "Sure." Barb approached and stood beside me, whistling to grab everyone's attention. She introduced me to everyone as her boyfriend and then said, "My mother has something to say before we continue with this party." Turning to me, she muttered, "I'm keeping the keys because if I know my father and brother, you'll be too goddamn drunk to drive." Barb's mother, Gloria, spoke. "I'd like to officially announce the engagement of my only daughter, Barbara, to retired Major Jonathan Charles Barnes. She came home because Charles wanted to get our approval before asking our daughter. My husband trained him and described him as one of the greatest he'd ever had. It required the most toes for him to give his blessing as soon as he received it. He got down and proposed in front of us. Everyone was surprised, but Mike continued, "You're going to be my brother-in-law," and repeated it as if trying to persuade himself that it was genuine. For the following hour, Barb introduced me to her extended family. Barb revealed to me that she hadn't seen her family seem that proud in a long time. She was correct. They got intoxicated. I'm not sure how we got back to the hotel or, heck, I didn't recall. I spent half the night asking my future wife if I had made a fool of myself. She concluded by remarking, "You outlasted the other two idiots." That did not impress me as I fought to get out of bed. I wasn't feeling well. Barb thought it served me well. I vowed to myself that this would be the last time. During brunch, Barb took a picture of her ring on a whim using her phone and texted it to Judy as an attachment. She texted, "You can call me Mom if you agree to be my maid of honor." Less than 10 minutes later, we were having a conference call. Barb, I, and my 3 very enthusiastic girls were all overjoyed. We learnt that James and Joan were dealing with the FBI on several levels and could face a variety of crimes. Their defense bills were increasing. Both of their careers were ruined. James had DNA tests done on his 3 boys, which revealed that they were all his. I suppose all he was going through and had done had caused misgivings in his own mind. It, like their marriage, may have been tested to the limit. My 3 girls believed they would be lucky to live another year. The money that paid for it all was tracked back to James, who had legal authority granted to him by Joan upon my false death. I had it paid for through the trust. It demonstrated that their plans had begun long before I apprehended them. We had no idea that in his distorted mentality, everything that happened to him was my fault. He still claimed that he had been framed. Most believed he had lost all credibility. My trust, which had yet to be finalized, was suddenly worth millions, and the attorneys would fight over it for months. I informed them that the court had appointed a trustee to act until a settlement was reached. The only issue we were having right now was that my 3 children wanted us to come to New York for a family celebration. We agreed to come as soon as Barb's work schedule allowed it. All of the girls were eager for a date. I resolved it with the board. With my future bride's blessing, I assumed the role of CEO. Meetings would be held on the second and fourth Fridays of each month, with secured conference calls 3 days a week. I wanted to limit my time away. She had become my world. Barb began her first day at the hospital and quickly settled in. Working in the air in a small town provided much free time at times, so she started taking classes to advance her career. She worked 12-hour days one week, then 3 the following. Her hours were from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m., so I would have meals ready to serve. When she returned home, our acquaintances laughed at how domesticated I had become. It made me question if they knew anything about a bachelor's existence. Following her first 3 weeks, we went to New York that Thursday night so that I could attend a press conference the next morning to announce my new position on the board. After that media event, I learned that the court had ruled that because all the changes made to my trust after the report of my false death were made illegally, the court ruled that I would have to pay James and Joe 19% of its current value, and if they wanted any of the personal property, they would have to buy it back at market value if I agreed to sell it. It was a major blow to them. I authorized my lawyers to finalize the split specifics, as long as they kept their family home. Barb and I returned home to my parents after the conference, where we discovered that my 3 kids and Stephen would be joining us on Saturday. Mom and Dad decided to create their own version of Welcome to the Family. Despite having a crew, she prepared the meals. Barb and I had one major challenge to solve: where we would marry and how we would please our relatives and family. By the end of the day, with the help of my parents, we had decided to marry in Ohio, have a second reception here with family and friends, and then gather together with the crew back home once everything was done. I'd ask Barb's brother Mike to be my best man. Judy was Barb's maid of honor. Jen and Joe would be the women-in-waiting. Stephen and her other brother would round up the wedding party. We chose the date for the last Saturday in December because Barb had always wanted to be a December bride. We had just concluded a beautiful family meal prepared by my mother when there came a knock on the front door. When my father came from answering it, he surprised us. My previous wife had asked to speak with me. My instinct said, "No way." My parents did as well. Barb stated that you must forgive her before you can be free from the past. Connie informed me about her affair and how your wisdom won them both over. It is time to apply your own wisdom to yourself. I walked into Dad's office for a few minutes before calling Joan in. "Joan, I mentioned that before we begin, I'd like you to hear the last words I heard from you years ago. I was sitting in the judge's office when he spoke with you. Pay attention to your tone of speech and what you stated back then. Just so you know, I emailed CNN a statement stating that I was present when the judge taped it and listened to the exchange through speakers. You two were talking." Joan's face turned white. She now realized I knew the whole truth. The media has never shown the entire conversation. I excused myself to have a big drink so she could hear her own words the way I did that fateful day. I returned with a scotch and water, listening to the door until the judge and her chat was over before returning to Dad's office. Imagine if you can. That conversation from my perspective, as I listened to you purposefully write me out of my children's life. Consider my perspective on the cheating, hurt, pain, and tears. Consider how much we all had to spend. Because you become my older brother's high school classmate, 304. I've asked James several times what he did during his 3 years with us, aside from screwing you behind my back. What was it that you famously informed our daughter about their father's death? It was sad but accurate. But we may be grateful because Uncle James introduced all of you. I spoke rudely and firmly. Did you ever express something in our relationship that was completely true? Jennifer, Judy, and Joe have all heard the same thing. They've all seen the date it was recorded and know it occurred before my alleged death. As a result, they now question everything James and you have ever said to them. They're listening to that tape, and it's damaged any trust they had in the two of you for good. I informed her that time had demonstrated that I, James, and you were nothing more than a tool for you to utilize to achieve your goals. When Jennifer found me, I realized I couldn't be the walking dead anymore. It was time for me to restore my name and family in my life. I declared that the family secrets must come to an end. Joan appeared shocked. My words were torn apart like steel arrows. Everything I said pointed directly to her and my brother. The tears were now falling like a gentle spring shower. I had to question if it was due to remorse or shame about being detected. I went out from behind my father's desk, handed her a box of Kleenex, and took my drink in hand. I went, stating I'd allow her to gather her thoughts. Barb and my parents were in the living room when I entered. My mother was showing Barb all of the images she had gathered throughout the years. By the looks on your face. "I'm guessing things aren't going well," my dad said. She heard her own comments to the judge in his response before I offered her the opportunity to reply. I encouraged them to imagine how I must have felt while listening to a conversation on his speakerphone at the time. I asked her a couple questions, and she lost it. So I'm giving her time to gather her thoughts before we speak. I informed her that her daughters had also overheard the exchange, which had occurred days before my supposed death. I pointed out that her own comments had shattered her daughter's confidence in both. I came out because I didn't want to see her in tears. I responded that she could no longer deny her own past or her lies. "Are you okay?" Barb inquired in genuine concern. "Simply telling the facts." I stated, "It has given me an inner peace that I have not felt in a long time. My hatred and anger are gone. I'm now prepared to embrace whatever comes." Mom commented that Barb appears to have been correct at the time. After refilling my drink, I returned to the office and sat down, starting a cigarette. I waited for her to start. "We noticed you catching us with the brass ring. Finally, we would obtain what we had always wanted, the opportunity to live our lives outside of closed doors." When the judge called, James was in the kitchen with me. We both noticed him tampering with what was not his business. His hatred and anger fueled my response. Joan remarked softly, "I really hadn't thought much about my comments." You know, the judge was correct. Your father had received an SMS, the footage I captured before the judge summoned him. Your father instructed us not to do anything till he arrived within an hour. He was in his jet heading down when he heard our chat. He went into shock. They both believed, as did I, that you had set everyone up. If the truth came out, their careers would be ruined, and their reputations would be irreparably harmed. When Jennifer heard it, she requested that we have our DNA tested to confirm what we thought was true. Fortunately, she was my biological daughter. Both would have killed you if it had been legal. I responded. Your statements demonstrated that what you two were doing was deliberate. Now you understand why. Until now, your own father has had little to do with you. When he returned home, he informed the entire family about what needed to be done and why. My issue is, what gave you the right to exclude me from our children's lives? Our daughters want to know, so I have to ask. As I rose up, her tears began to fall again, and I went out. "What are your thoughts so far?" Barb asked. "She is trying to excuse her conduct. Nothing more, nothing less. She has exhibited no remorse and has not apologized. I believe she is merely sorry about it. The fact that everything has come out." I explained that just glancing at the three of them taught me everything I needed to know. They were just as astonished as I was. We were attempting to figure out why she had arrived. "We're both looking at doing time," Joan replied when I returned to the room. "The FBI has charged us with lying to them, at least tax evasion, faking a death stealing, and several other offenses. Everything involves your trust. Our lawyers are currently negotiating a plea deal before we are officially charged. James and I both believe that if you spoke up, they might not be so severe. Unfortunately, they have yet to ask me a question. Why should they? I was in the troops fighting for our independence while others were playing games." I smiled and said, "I can't really help you, can I? You made your bed. You lie in it. This is James and Mess. I have always wondered if you were ever truly in love with me. I now see you weren't. I guess you learned the hard way that there are consequences to your actions that money cannot purchase. You have not changed. I had hoped that you would apologize for what you had done, but you did not. You came to try to save your own skin. It was all about you and what you desired. Please grant me the pleasure of escorting you out. I suppose you'll both go to jail and say it's not your fault." I couldn't stop giggling as she exited the house. Mom and Dad were being exactly that. Barb and I had to sleep on separate beds. It made me realize how devoted to Barb I'd been. Nothing beats the comforting presence of a loved one's body next to you in the middle of the night. It was a night spent tossing and turning. It made me realize how much we'd become one. Barb snuck into my room and told me I couldn't sleep without you. It made me smile, I replied. Moments like this make us feel youthful, as she climbed in with me. When she saw my tears, I drew her into my arms. She had to ask why I replied. I now realized what it meant to have a loving wife. It became a memory we'd share and treasure for the rest of our lives. I guess my remarks hit home because I started crying. I cannot, her down with gentle kisses. I need to know now, she asked. How do you feel about us having children? I paused before speaking and then said, kids have a special ability to keep the elderly young at heart. If you can accept that I will be in my 50s before the last of our children leaves the house, I don't mind if we have more than one. I guess it's time we started working on one, she remarked. So we did. When I went down, Dad was already awake. The smell of freshly brewed coffee permeated the entire bottom floor. It triggered recollections from my childhood. It had always been his habit to brew coffee when he was off. I had to agree. Coffee produced that way was richer and more enjoyable than today's drip coffee. Good morning. As I stepped in, Dad told me to get a cup and join him at the table. I'd like to thank Barb and you for spoiling my nice night's sleep. What was my response? Your mother had to rouse me up when Barb entered your room and asked what I thought we should do. He laughed. I informed her that you were both old enough to understand what you were doing. I'm going to enjoy taunting her about it for weeks. Tell Mom that Barb and I don't sleep well apart. We learned that thanks to her last night, so I responded and informed her that we intend to give her a couple more grandchildren within the next several years. Barb wants them to be close due of her age. Dad replied, I suppose we'll be looking for a home and sperm now that I'm semi-retired. Your mother will want to spend a lot of time as a grandmother again. Jennifer and Steve were the first to arrive. Barb and I hadn't seen them since their wedding, so we got a chance to catch up. They were both delighted to be a part of our bridal party. They explained what they did on their honeymoon. Barb described what happened when I met her parents, making it clear that I was a happy drunk. That embarrassed me by showing them a video of her father, brother, and me drunkenly performing a Baroque song. They roared at that one. Even my father broke a smile. Steve found it amusing because Barb's father had been my drill sergeant, and her brother Judy and one of my grunts, Joanne, arrived about an hour later. Judy was ecstatic when Barb asked her to be our maid of honor. Until then, she had not taken it seriously. They spent quite some time catching up on all the gossip from where she used to work and their mutual acquaintances. Mom had to gloat and rejoice over our plans to have children. Of course, Jennifer had to inform her sisters about my renowned video, so, of course, I got a lot of teasing over that. Steve asked Barb to send him a copy so that he could forward it to his father. Barb said, "Let them know that we're engaged." We'd been quite busy with the addition's development and her new work. We haven't seen them since the beginning of the month. It should be completed before the end of the month. She stated that it was a 4-bedroom garage with a large separate storage area behind and a 3-bedroom apartment above. We have a fully enclosed walkway to the mudroom, which will be connected to the house. It took them a week to level the ground before they could start building. At the same time, we increased the size of our leveled backyard and extended the patio. We're hoping to have it stained and sealed to match the house. If the weather holds up, the excess soil and rock that we removed was used to increase the level space in front. It was then that I told my daughter that I had spoken with their mother last night. They all became silent after utilizing Dad's internet and Barb's laptop. I played the audio tape of our conversation on Dad's TV and watched as they listened intently to the judges and Joan. Then she and I had a talk. I could tell my daughters were stunned. I do not believe it. There was no explanation, guilt, or remorse. However, she came expecting you to bail them out since you owed them. Joanne claimed you asked her questions, which she totally ignored. It's unfortunate that she is so self-centered that she fails to recognize the consequences of her own actions. Dad, Joanne stated that in her universe, everything appears to revolve around her. Was she always like this? I paused for a moment before saying, I'd have to say this before the 3 of you were born. No. I remember my first departure from home after your birth, despite the fact that I was only there for 3 months. I could tell she had changed. I dismissed it at first as Mom being overstressed, fatigued, and exhausted because the 3 of you were a handful at times. That's when I hired your first full-time nanny and left the army to be home with you all. You were about 3 years old when I got out. We were strangers to one another. But she quickly began to warm up. I now see that it was all a ruse. During that year, James had moved in and found work. He began his civilian life, and I, with Dad's assistance, began establishing my business. I suppose my relationship with her at the time was merely a facade she used to build her future with him. That's why I questioned if she'd ever been honest with me. I stated genuinely that it appears she suffered a mental breakdown as a result of severe depression following our birth, for which she received no treatment. Judy commented, "Barb and I have seen that quite often in our line of work. One of the classic indications is a shift in personality. It's how the mind helps them cope. That might explain what happened, but not her conduct. Unfortunately, after everything that has been done, this is the final straw. My mother and she have finished. Both of her sisters agreed. I assumed this was just another thing she could blame me for. I had no idea at the time how accurate that would be in changing the mood. Barb decided to ask the ladies to help her choose the color of their outfits. I got it knowing I would be wearing black. When I was asked why, I explained that black is the hue for those who are grieving after a loss. Jennifer had to ask what I was going to lose. I declared my liberation. That elicited a huge groan. My father watched me grab a beer and go outside to clear my mind. He realized I had a lot on my mind, so he joined me. "Son, I understand how difficult it is to face. Try not to second-guess yourself or what you did. You made the greatest decisions for all of us at the time based on what you knew. There is no need in looking back. Life is simply too brief. Can't you bless 3 beautiful girls, making their grandfathers very proud? They convey your morals, principles, and ideals effectively. A future wife with a heart of gold. My father and mother divided their estate amongst me and you all, riding James out. You served your country and saved countless lives. You always picked the high road in your life, even if you temporarily lost everything. Today, you stand tall and proud." He explained that you are free to live your life the way you see fit. Your daughters have just written their mother out of their lives. They made difficult decisions, just like you, my father continued, with wisdom and understanding that should have convinced you that what you did was correct. It was solely your conduct. This brought your daughters home. They recognize that, regardless of the cost, you did what you did for the good of all of us. That says it all. My father had always managed to make me feel proud. His brilliant remarks always seemed to lift me out of the fog, giving me a clear vision. "Just imagine having grandchildren who are older than their uncles and aunts," he added with a giggle. "Few people get a second chance to do things right. What should you focus on? Come and leave the crumbs of your past behind," with a smile on my face. We stepped back in and joined the rest of the family as they continued to arrange my wedding. Barb, my mother, and my 3 daughters were now debating whether to send flowers to a church ceremony or a justice of the peace. "Will it have a Christmas theme?" I shake my head. So Dad and I spent the rest of the afternoon playing crib for a cent, with skunks worth double points. I wound up losing $4.65. He told them to go for it and just show up at the wedding. It's the most convenient method to stay out of trouble. He was correct on Sunday before we departed. My mother had Barb phone her mother to alert them that we were getting married there. She was thrilled. Barb also stated that her prospective mother-in-law wants to be part in the organization of events. Dad overheard my mother say over the phone, "Don't worry about the cost. My husband and I are giving these 2 a wedding present." He rolled his eyes. The 2 mothers disagreed, but my mother triumphed by putting her foot down. There were no other options. Since she was a teenager, her close female friends had always referred to her as Sarge. They did agree that everything needed to be authorized by Barb. It reinforced in my thoughts that I was married my mother's replica because Barb was the same way. The way things were coming together made me wonder if Joan and I had truly been in love. We flew home. Barb mentioned that her folks were flying out. Mom wanted to talk about some sights and what to offer on the menu, which band to hire, and everything else she could think of to make things more complicated. They wanted to see how we lived our daily lives. We didn't even have to pick them up. Bill was hiring a truck so they could take day trips from our property while touring the island. He had always wanted to do this, and now they had a chance. It's little over 2 months until the wedding. Time was catching up with us quickly. We returned home to discover that the dive had burned down. So Tuesday morning, I found myself sitting with the owner. He didn't have insurance and wasn't planning to rebuild. I offered him fair market value for the property, and we negotiated his liquor license until we reached an agreement that the local council would support. The mayor approved the request within 3 days, and by the end of the week, they started development on the location. The contractors were excited. They were constructing a back-to-back restaurant and bar on a city block, utilizing additional wood from the mill and a concrete floor. The two businesses share a common internal wall. Everyone was thrilled with the village-approved plans. They said they would finish the outside in 2 weeks. Former employees consented to work in the pub and were excited about its new name. Bullfrogs contact the closest real estate agent. We had the restaurant space leased before they finished. I hired a Seattle-based firm to design and set up the bar. I paid extra to get it done quickly. I persuaded Barb to have her mother scan her favorite photo of a bull in uniform and transmit it to us. I used that photograph to have a glass business design the main entrance glass doors, with his entire image scribbled on each door in front of his waist. The bar's name appeared on each door. Throughout the month, Barb had ordered furniture for her new apartment. Her and our mothers had very much decided everything regarding the wedding. A day before her parents came, everything was finished. That Thursday night, the new pub celebrated its big opening. It was more successful than the last one ever was. Everyone raved about the bar food selection. Barb smiled since she had planned all the goods and given them individual names. We had 31 days until the wedding. Barb's parents would arrive around 5 on Friday night, so I was surprised to learn that morning that Barb wanted me to drive her to the regional airport in Port, insisting on driving the Jeep. We had to get there by 2. I asked her why. She described it as a surprise. We arrived at the airport, were attended to in the afternoon, and witnessed a little 6-seater plane fly in. I learned something new. I didn't realize my father flew his own jet. They both looked terrific. We had settled my parents in and were sharing beers. When Barb's parents arrived and were settled, it was too late to start dinner. We drove them down to our new tavern. I drove Barb's parents in my old Ford truck and let him drive. My future mother-in-law stated my truck reminded her of his truck when they initially started dating. Barb accompanied us in her vehicle, which had become her pride and joy. When we reached the bar, that was bullshit. He was astounded to see his whole image on the main doors twice. My father, standing next to me, spoke softly. "Well done." I said, "Bull, when you walk in, I want you to scream the order, just like you did when you demanded our recruits' information." He agreed to humor me. And did, walking in after opening the door. He delivered his order with a roar, as if we were all standing in front of him. 6 former Marines promptly gathered in formation and saluted him once more. He had trained each of them. He moved down the line, shaking their hands, and greeted them each with their entire names. Gloria looked at me proudly and said, "You will have to carry him home." I nodded and chuckled. Barb kissed me and said, "I love you." She then informed her mother that she had no idea I had named our new pub after her father. Charlie hadn't told me because he wanted it to be a surprise. Bill lost when he noticed the plague on the wall above the bar, which was named after Bullfrog Patterson, the hardest drill instructor of all. We all tasted Barb's menu that night and decided on a bar. The cuisine was excellent. Dad and I had to take Bill upstairs to his bed. His old trainees made him pissy drunk. It would be a weeks-long discussion. How much more pleasant he was when he wasn't in power. Bill would say for years. It was the second time in his life he had been surprised and perplexed. The first was when I inquired about his daughters, Gloria. My dad and I were sitting in the living room, reminiscing about the day's activities, when she announced the news. Paul was being pushed into retirement after 40 years of service and was at a crossroads in his life. Mike was taking over the family farm at the end of the year, and they intended to move to town. Bull took it hard. He was still too full of pee and vinegar to retire. When I glanced into Barb's eyes, I noticed her mounting concern. I told Barb that if he lived here, he would be an excellent option to manage the bar, Gloria said. "But where will we live?" "There isn't much available, Mom," Barb replied with a big smile. "We have an in-law suite. If Dad goes for it, it's yours. I should warn you, though, that thunderstorms here can be loud and violent." Her mother glanced at her and asked, "How do you manage them? Ever since you were a child. When we had a bad storm, you would burrow into our beds." Barb smiled as she glanced at me knowingly. "Charlie has helped me make them one of my favorite things," she remarked with a big smile. My parents caught the inner gathering and began to giggle. As Gloria and Ball headed toward the island, my parents, John and Silva, spent the next 3 days looking for a new place to live. We still had not told Bill about our plans. Gloria wanted to see how he saw the place before making an offer to him. The furniture has finally arrived. Barb and I were busy unpacking everything and arranging everything. Barb observed an official-looking automobile approaching the end of the driveway, so we both went outside to greet it. It was the FBI searching for me. They wanted to speak with me alone, but I explained that I had nothing to hide from my future bride and would want to speak with her there. So we found ourselves seated at the kitchen table, sharing a coffee. The agent, who identified himself as Peter McCormick, had some disturbing news. There were 2 arrests last week. My brother James was arrested for fraud, tax evasion, fabricating a death, attempted murder, and theft, regarding my trust in the third-degree attack on his wife. He'd been denied bail. Joan had filed for divorce and was facing numerous charges, but she was given bail because of their children. The difficulty was that an informant had come forward to reveal that James had been attempting to obtain information about who could be hired to perform a contract kill and may have been successful. They wanted to know my schedule and plans for the following 2 months. While the matter was being investigated, Barb's face became white. They were taking it seriously since the trust included a condition stating that if I divorced and died within 6 months of the date, my ex-wife would manage my trust. Lawyers agreed that until the trust was split and sanctioned by the court, I couldn't legally modify anything in it. Agents had been dispatched to the region to investigate this matter. They made it obvious that I couldn't alter my daily schedule in any manner. Barb and I understood they were treating the situation extremely seriously. After they went, we got down and talked about how we were going to tell my parents and what we could do to protect ourselves. It was the last Saturday the 6 of us would be together before the wedding. My parents had discovered a 5-acre lot outside of port and had completed the transaction. Their real estate agent introduced them to a local contractor who agreed to construct them a log home slightly larger than ours on a 4-foot crawl space. They had ordered a customized kit online. It would be transported to the construction site in 3 weeks, but I wasn't looking forward to returning home. He found the slower pace of life in our tiny town appealing. Her parents and I sat in the living room. My parents had gone out. I asked him, "Bud, how much will you take from the farm after you relocate to town?" He responded, "We haven't really given it much thought. To be honest, I dislike the idea of having neighbors 200 yards away." "Why, Dad?" Barb stated. "Charlie and I were hoping you'd consider moving here and managing the bar for us. You may both live in the in-law suite without paying rent. The compensation would begin at $60,000 per year. To say he was astonished would be an understatement. But he agreed to think about it. We told him to take his time and let us know when he made his decision. Gloria subsequently informed her daughter that she believed it was a done deal because Bull was so proud of the bar. He simply needed to embrace in his mind what was already in his heart. So, while they worked in the kitchen cooking a large meal, they discussed what Gloria wanted to bring with her. As we returned to the house, the 4 of us watched as they drove away back to Ohio. I told my folks that we needed to talk. My mother was heartbroken when I told her about the FBI. Stop. She blamed herself for not raising James. Right. I gave her the judge's counsel and pointed out that he had a fine life before getting engaged with my former wife. Remember, Mom, you taught us to connect with people who would lift us up, not tear us down. Standing up for the beliefs and principles you instilled in us has kept me grounded and strong. They were essential in shaping the man I am today. James simply threw away his. Well, Mom and Dad. Barb said I have some excellent news that may cheer you up, but you must promise me that you would keep it to yourself. I stared at Barb, bewildered, wondering what she had to say. My parents stated that they would consent. My doctor estimates that I will only be 32 weeks pregnant when we marry. Barb exclaimed with delight. If it is a girl, her name will be Gloria. Elizabeth, a boy, Jonathan, Charles Barnes, the 4th. I assumed my mother would shout. I nearly fainted. So it was the day before my wedding. Bullfrog, Mike, my dad, and the rest of my wedding party. After the rehearsal, we're in the Legion having a few beers. The females were all elsewhere, throwing Barb a bridal party. Paul was saying farewell to several of his pals, and they were rubbing their noses in it. It's in. He was leaving Ohio and relocating to Washington State to run a tavern named after himself. James had been foiled, the contractor for Kill Court. After admitting guilty, he received a hard toe. Joan agreed to testify against her husband in exchange for time served and 5 years of parole. His trial would begin in the new year. The trust had been settled. Joan had filed for divorce and listed the estate where she resided with her 3 sons for sale. The last 2 of our 4 children will enter kindergarten next month. Jonathan arrived first. Gloria appeared 10 months later, followed by the twins, Silva and Wilford Bullfrogs. Real name: Jennifer and Stephen have both a boy and a girl. Judy married a Marine from Maine who works in the Corps under me. Joanne married the measly Mike. They established a Bullfrog bar near the property. Life gets better the second time around. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired. Take care.